Hello and welcome to The Practical Side. The Practical Side is a discussion with different legal experts on the practical side of law. Thank you very much for following The Practical Side. And today we will be discussing the practical side of the Limitation Act. Joining me for this wonderful discussion is Advocate Brijesh Singh. Hello, Brijesh, and welcome to The Practical Side.
Good morning, Alok. It's my pleasure to be on your channel.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for sparing time. Brijesh, before we go ahead, let me just introduce you to all our students. So, dear students, Brijesh Singh holds a master's degree in law and he's also in the academic side. That is, he's also a guest faculty with the University Law College in Bangalore. But primarily, Brijesh is an advocate at the High Court of Karnataka and he practices with different courts in Karnataka in all the laws. When it comes to his expertise, it is not just one or two laws, whether it's constitution, arbitration, he handles all of them. And more importantly, Brijesh has an academic bent of mind which will really benefit all our students. So, Brijesh, we are here for the discussion on the Limitation Act. So,
Yes.
students, just for your understanding, students here study Limitation Act in brief in one subject called jurisprudence, interpretation, and general laws. So, there are different laws like the Constitution, Limitation Act, General Clauses Act, arbitration, all of that they've clubbed it in one subject. So since limitation is just one chapter in that subject, the first question comes to us is what was the need to enact the Limitation Act? Why do we have this act at all?
Yes, that's a very good question to start with. You see, the Limitation Act, although it's a very thin statute having very few sections, it's a very, very important statute so far as the rights of a particular person are concerned. Although the act does not extinguish any person's right, it does extinguish a person's right to seek remedy for that particular cause over a period of time. And that is what is very important, because when it comes to prosecuting a case or a cause before a court, if the limitation period for that particular cause for seeking remedy on that particular clause has been extinguished, no amount of explanation, unless it is so provided under the law, can actually bring that person out of that situation and allow him to prosecute that cause by the court. Now, just to come to the history of the Limitation Act, the history and the purpose behind the
Purpose. I
limitation.
mean, why do we even have it? Correct.
Yes, the purpose behind having the act, the Limitation Act itself, is that, in the words of the drafters themselves, they said that the utility of a statute of limitation has never been a matter of serious doubt or dispute. It has been said that the statute of limitation is a statute of repose, peace, and justice. On one hand, it is one of repose because it extinguishes stale demands and quiets title. And in the words of John Watt, controversies are restricted to a fixed period of time, lest they should become immortal while men are mortal. So the purpose that it serves is that it secures peace as it ensures that the rights should be of a definite period. It secures justice as by lapse of time, evidence in support of rights may have been destroyed. Now, the operation of law of prescription has been explained again by Lord Plunkett, who says that in the form of a metaphor, he has eloquently stated that time holds in one hand a scythe and in the other an hourglass. And while the scythe mows down the evidence of our rights, the hourglass measures the period which renders that evidence superfluous. So while on one hand, with the moving down of the evidence of a person's rights, it becomes impossible after a particular period of time to bring out the evidence in support or in defense of a cause that is being agitated against a particular individual. It is important that the period in which, metaphorically, this kaiti moves down the evidence of our rights is measured, and that period is taken into consideration for deciding what exactly is the time frame within which the evidence that could be taken in evidence, the evidence that could be taken in defense against such a cause can be brought before the appropriate court once a cause is being prosecuted before that particular court of law. So the simple purpose behind having this act is that over a period of time, there could be dilution of the evidence, or the evidence itself that is available to a person in defense could lose its character essentially, and it may not be available to that person to produce it before the court. And therefore, it should not become a perpetual right for any individual to come before the court and prosecute a person in respect of any right that he may have. The other factor is that, again, as stated by John Vogt, men are mortal. Since men are mortal, since we have a particular period of time within which we have to spend our lives on this planet and then go away, it also makes sense that the causes which might arise for someone to prosecute another individual or groups of individual or entities should also have a fixed time frame within which they can be exercised. If such a limitation is not made by a statute, such a cause will become immortal, or it will become perpetual, and then there will be no end to litigation whatsoever. In fact, if I can sum up the purpose behind having the Limitation Act, I can do so by invoking two very famous maxims, legal maxims, that is, interest republicae et sit finis litium. That is, in the interest of the state as a whole, there should be a limit to litigation, and vigilantibus non dormantibus jura subvenuent, which means that the law will assist only those who are vigilant with their rights and not those who sleep upon it. So the purpose behind having a limitation is thus twofold.
Yeah, I think that was really well summed up. So, dear viewers or students, so what Brijesh is trying to tell us is very simple. The law doesn't support the people who slumber or sleep, in the sense that if you have a cause of action, you should take that initiative to go and institute a suit or anyway take steps. You can't just come back after 5 years or 10 years or 20 years and say that 20 years ago this thing happened. So the logic or the philosophy of the act is very simple. If man is going to have a lifetime where he's born and he's going to die one day, same way the cases or the problems he's going to have, there should be a time limit within which he can institute the case. So that is the simple logic and purpose of Limitation Act. Yes, most of you may already know this, but the angle which Brijesh brought in about the evidence was really wonderful, because evidence can get eroded or lost, or the relevance can go if it is too late, or if the time limit, the time gap between the cause of action or the problem which happened to the date when you actually filed the case. So that is the wonderful angle which Brijesh brought. So now, Brijesh, that we know the purpose behind the act, can you tell us what all is there in this act in terms of the structure of the Limitation Act 1963?
Yes. So the Limitation Act is basically comprised of 5 parts, and perhaps the most important part of the Limitation Act is the schedule. So very quickly, to give a gist of the 5 parts. Part 1 is the preliminary part of the act, which gives the short title and the definitions. Part 2 deals with the limitation of suits appeals and application, in the sense that this is a substantive part of the act which declares that there shall be a bar of limitation on the exercise of remedies before particular courts for particular causes. And it also provides for expiry of prescribed period when the court is closed, and the extension of prescribed period in certain cases under Section 4 and Section 5. Section 4 and Section 5 are very important sections in so far as the Limitation Act is concerned, because while on one hand, Section 4 talks about the expiry of prescribed period when the courts are closed, Section 5 talks about the extension of prescribed period in certain cases. Now, we have seen during the past year, when lockdowns were announced, the courts had been closed. The courts were not functioning at all. There was only limited functioning after a certain period of time, after a few months. But in any case, people were not in a position to approach the courts to ventilate their grievances. And lawyers were also not working. They were not able to work because of the lockdown itself. And therefore, the Supreme Court, exercising its power under Section 4 of the Limitation Act, had extended the period of limitation in respect of all matters which are covered under the Limitation Act. And over a period of almost 1 year, since it started on the 25th of March, the lockdown started on the 25th of March, all the way till the 31st of January, insofar as the state of Karnataka is concerned, the periods of limitation for all matters concerning it could either be with respect to filing of cases before the court, or with respect to filing of written statements, or with respect to filing of replies before the respective courts, so long as there is no specific statute which provides for it, and they are generally covered by the Limitation Act. All of that period has been extended by the Supreme Court, and in some instances, the High Court of Karnataka as well. So, Section 4 of the Limitation Act provides for what should be done when the courts are closed. So, what it essentially says is that when the courts are closed as on the date when the limitation for a particular act, for committing a particular act, it could either be filing of a case or filing of a written statement or any such thing. If on the day when the limitation for that particular act would expire, then on the very next day when the court reopens, that act should be done by the parties. It could either be filing of a case, a written statement, or a reply, or anything of that sort. And on the other hand, Section 5 is also very important, because Section 5 talks about the power of the court to condone delay in deserving cases. So
that is the sufficient cause.
Yeah, when there is sufficient cause, when bona fide reasons are given to explain why a party who was supposed to have exercised the right to seek a remedy within a prescribed period of time which is provided under the Limitation Act could not do so. If such a party is able to explain with sufficient cause, by giving sufficient cause that he was not able to do so, then the courts certainly have power to condone the delay, and the courts have done it on numerous occasions, because at the end of the day, justice must be done between the parties, and procedure, after all, is a handmaid of justice. That's all. So that is insofar as part 2 is concerned. Now, insofar as part 3 is concerned, this talks about the computation of period of limitation. So it talks about various exclusions of time during the period of limitation. What would be the effect of certain acts, such as the effect of death on or before the accrual of the right to sue, the effect of fraud or mistake, the effect of acknowledgement in writing, the effect of payment on account of a debt or of interest on legacy, the effect of acknowledgement of payment, so on and so forth. So basically, part 3 talks about the computation of period of limitation. Part 4, on the other hand, talks about the acquisition of ownership by possession. So what we legally talk, or what we legally define as acquisition of title by adverse possession. Although this is something which can be taken in defense, this is something that can never be asserted positively so as to give rise to a cause of action for a person who is holding a property adverse to the title of the original title holder. It is still a very valid defense that can be taken by an individual who is in possession of a particular property to claim title over that particular property by virtue of his continuous possession for a particular period of time adverse to the title of the original owner. And then part 5 is deals with miscellaneous provisions. And then the schedule talks about what is exactly the period of time which is prescribed under the Limitation Act. So this you can call as the business part of the Limitation Act, which we all refer to when we have to file suits or when we have to when we have to go before a court for exercise of any particular remedy before that particular court or tribunal. So this is how you can treat the Limitation Act. These are the various parts of the Limitation Act.
Yeah. You have actually told the entire act in a short way, in a very beautiful way. In fact, I would love students to watch it 2-3 times if you feel it was too much for you to get it. He's covered everything because I teach this subject. I know it's really wonderfully summarized. So now, Brijesh, going to the next question is, now, end of the day, we're talking about the time limit within which they can institute a case or a suit. All right. So what happens if there is a lapse of time? That is, let's say for some particular case, the time limit is 3 months or 1 year or 3 years. For, like you said in the schedule, we have different kinds of cases and the time limit within which they should institute the case. So if there is a lapse of time, what happens to the right? Because originally I had a right to institute a case or take action against the other person because my rights were violated. So what happens to this right if the time has lapsed?
Yes. So that's a very good question. Because although by the scheme of the act, and once we looked at the limitation period which is prescribed, we could be tempted to think that, okay, if I have not exercised my right to remedy within that prescribed time, I may have lost the right. But then that is not true. The only thing that the Limitation Act is, if we go back to the purpose with which the Limitation Act has been enacted, it is to end litigation and it is to provide a certainty as to when a person should be ready to defend himself by keeping the evidence with him. So after a period of time, after the lapse of a particular period of time which is prescribed in the Limitation Act, if a person does not wish, either consciously or by lapse or by not being diligent, he may only lose his right to remedy, but then he does not lose the right by itself. The right will still remain in that person. So in the event that the person against whom that right would have accrued to that particular individual who has failed to exercise his remedy, if that person, on the other hand, prosecutes the person who actually holds the right can still be exercised, the right can still be brought before the court in the form of a defense. So while it is only the extinction of the remedy, it is not the extinction of the right itself. The right will always remain with the person, but only that his right or his right to the remedy will get extinguished. That is all.
Okay. So here, dear students, there are two things here, the right and remedy. So please understand that the right will continue to be with the person, but he loses the remedy, means he doesn't have an opportunity to exercise the remedy. Is that right, Brijesh?
Correct. The right will always remain with him. He can take it up in defense,
Exactly.
but he cannot assert it positively in the form of seeking a remedy on that.
Yeah, you can't assert it, but you can always defend if there is a situation like that. So now there's one thing, since courts are on vacation or courts have the concept of vacation, let us say that my limitation period is ending May 15th, 2021. And for example, the court vacation is May 1st to May 30th. I'm just giving a random date.
Yes.
So my limitation ends on May 15th, but for me to go and institute the case, I do the courts are on vacation. So what is the practical position about this?
Yeah. So the practical position on this is dealt with again by Section 4 of the Limitation Act. So Section 4 of the Limitation Act says, I'll just read it out for the benefit of all your viewers.
Sure.
It says expiry of prescribed period when court is closed. When the prescribed period for any suit, appeal, or application expires on a day when the court is closed, the suit, appeal, or application may be instituted, preferred, or made on the day when the court reopens. And there is also an explanation which is given to this, which says that a court shall be deemed to be closed on any day within the meaning of this section if during any part of its normal working hours it remains closed on that day. So, like you said, if the period of limitation for you to do a particular act would get lapsed on the 15th of May 2021 when the courts would be on vacation. If the courts were to reopen on the 1st of June, on the 1st of June itself, you will have to file that case to avoid your case from being barred by limitation. That is what Section 4 of the Limitation Act provides. So you have to be diligent enough that although on the day when the limitation prescribed would lapse during court vacations, or it can even happen not only during court vacation, let's say the 23rd of January, which was a Sunday, or the 24th of January, or the 26th of January, which is today, which is a public holiday. If the period of limitation for you to file a case would be to lapse today, then you would have to file the case tomorrow itself, on immediately upon the reopening of the court. So you'd have to be diligent insofar as that is concerned.
Okay. Yeah, so I think there is a clear clarity that if there is a court vacation or for whatever reason, I can't file the case, which is not my mistake, but because the court is not functioning, the next day, the next working day, we need to institute the case and we have to be diligent enough to be aware of that. Okay. So, Brijesh, now going further, uh, actually, this question has two parts. What are some of the genuine reasons which can be accepted for not filing the suit or not initiating the case within the limitation period? First question. And if somebody has real genuine reasons, what is the solution? Again, looking at it practically.
Okay. Yeah. So again, we come back to Section 5 of the Limitation Act, which we had touched upon during the early part
Sufficient
of
cause concept.
Yeah, the sufficient cause concept. So under Section 5 of the Limitation Act itself, it provides that extension of period, a prescribed period in certain cases. Any appeal or any application other than an application under any of the provisions of Order 21 of the Code of Civil Procedure may be admitted after the prescribed period if the appellant or the applicant satisfies the court that he had sufficient cause for not preferring the appeal or making the application within such period. And the explanation is that the fact that the appellant or the applicant was missed by any order, practice, or judgment of the High Court in ascertaining or computing the period of prescribed period may be sufficient cause within the meaning of this section. So what it says is that if there is sufficient cause that you can show to the court that you were not able to file an appeal or any application within the prescribed time period, then it being an enabling clause, the court has the power on being satisfied that you were prevented from approaching the court within the prescribed period of time to condone the delay. So the other part of your question was, what could be the sufficient cause for not having been able to do
Yeah, like
it?
what kind of reasons?
Yeah, the reasons that could be given is that although there are no exhaustive reasons which are given within the Limitation Act itself, some of the reasons which are given is if you were under any legal disability from approaching the court at that particular point of time, or if at all you were under a bona fide mistake with respect to which forum you had to approach. Let's say that, for example, there is an order which is passed by the BDA commissioner or the BBMP commissioner with respect to demolishing a part of your client's house because it does not follow the bylaws of BDA or BBMP. Let's say your client receives a notice like that. Now, the natural course of action would be for you to challenge it before the Karnataka Appellate Tribunal by filing an appropriate application before the Appellate Tribunal. If by virtue of not knowing this, you were to file a writ petition before the High Court, and if you were to spend sufficient time before the High Court in prosecuting this writ petition, and at the end of the day, the High Court comes to the conclusion that since you already had alternative remedy before the Karnataka Appellate Tribunal, you should have gone there rather than approach the High Court with under its writ jurisdiction. And if unfortunately the time you took in prosecuting the writ petition before the High Court, the time period for challenging the order of the BDA or the BBMP commissioner itself had lapsed, then you can request the High Court to make an order that the time that you have spent in prosecuting the writ petition before the High Court should not be taken into account while considering the time prescribed for you to file an appropriate application before the Karnataka Appellate Tribunal. And the court may pass such an order as well, saying that the time which was spent by the litigant before the High Court in wrongly prosecuting under the wrong impression that the remedy for that person lay before the High Court and not before the KAT, that period of time should not be taken into account while computing the period of limitation for that particular matter. And on production of that particular order, you could show that you had sufficient cause not to approach the KAT on the very first instance within the prescribed period of limitation. This is one. The other causes could be, there could be health reasons why the person who was supposed to file the case was not able to do so. There could be other reasons as well of disability. That there could be causes where we often see during the months of monsoon that there could be cyclones, there could be flooding. All of this could physically prevent the people who are supposed to file a case to approach the court. So all of these could happen. It depends from case to case. In so far as this particular section is concerned, you have to bring out cogent evidence before the court to show that you were unable to approach the court at that particular point of time for bona fide reasons. And if the court is satisfied about it, then it will certainly condone the delay.
Yeah. So basically, you need to prove that genuinely you had reasons, or you did have, like you said, that floods and cyclone, physically not
Yeah.
able to approach the court and stuff like that. So when you say court, that actually brings me to my next question: which court has the power to condone the delay if you don't file within the time limit?
Yeah. So again, there are two aspects to this. One is with respect to Section 4 and other is with respect to Section 5. Now, on one hand, we have seen that the example that I gave, the live example that we have today of the Supreme Court extending the period of limitation under Section 4, stating that for the purpose of Section 4, the courts should be considered still to be on vacation, so that the right of a particular party to exercise its remedy before any of the courts is not extinguished during the corona time when the lockdowns are still in, they're still being functional. So the Supreme Court, being the highest court in the country by virtue of the constitution itself, has the power to pass notifications of this nature, issue orders of this nature, by which the period of extension is in one shot extended, the period of limitation is in one shot extended for all the courts in the country, which is being done now. But the Supreme Court itself has also expressed that Limitation Act, by its very nature, will apply to cases where, in any act, the particular period of time within which a particular act has to be done has not been prescribed. So we need to understand very clearly that, just like the General Clauses Act will apply, the definitions in the General Clauses Act will apply to those statutes where there is no specific definition which is given for a particular term. Just like that, the Limitation Act will also apply only insofar as statutes do not within themselves contain any particular provision with respect to the time which is prescribed for doing any particular act. Now, for instance, within the Arbitration Act or within the Negotiable Instruments Act, for example, there is a period of limitation which is given for doing particular acts. Let's say under the Negotiable Instruments Act itself, which is a very, very commonly used act which has to do with check bounce cases, there is a very particular provision under section 138 of the act, which says that if at all there is dishonor of a check, within 30 days there has to be a legal notice that has to be issued on receiving the notice of dishonor. Within 15 days of receiving this check, with this statutory notice of a check dishonor, the drawer of the check must either reply to it, or he or she should make good the amount under the check, and within 30 days thereon, if at all the person who was the holder of the check is not satisfied, he should file a PCR before the concerned court. He should file a complaint in respect of the dishonor of the check. Now, this is what we call as a self-contained code. Like the Negotiable Instruments Act, the Arbitration Act is also there, SURFACI Act is also there. There are many acts which are there, which are self-contained codes insofar as the period of limitation is concerned, that the act or the statute itself provides that certain acts must be done within that particular amount of time itself. So if that particular act is not done within that particular amount of time which is provided in the act itself, you may not have a remedy of invoking section 5 of the Limitation Act, because section 5 of the Limitation Act may not be applicable in such cases. And therefore, where the cause has arisen and there is a remedy which is provided under a statute which specifically does not provide for any period of limitation, the Limitation Act would apply, and by corollary, section 5 of the Limitation Act would also apply. And the court which has the power to condone this delay would be the very same court before which the right to exercise this remedy would lie for that individual litigant. So this is a position insofar as section 5 and section 4 of the Limitation Act are concerned.
Yeah, I think viewers, you got a very clear picture on which or what are the courts that have the power to condone the delay when we talk about the sufficient cause concept. So because sufficient cause is one of the important things, even the next question is related to that. So when we say sufficient cause, is this, I mean, the power to condone the delay, is it an absolute power? Can you please share some light on that?
See, this particular power to condone the delay, like I said, it is subject to the fact whether the Limitation Act itself is applicable to that particular statute or not, to that particular case or not. So like I said, if there is a statute which actually covers the aspect of prescription of time for doing a particular act, the Limitation Act and by corollary section 5 of the Limitation Act may not directly apply, and that remedy may not be available to a person who has delayed in filing an application or a appeal or doing any particular act before that particular court. Under Section 5 of the Limitation Act, this power is also discretionary in nature. Wherever Section 5 of the Limitation Act, wherever an application under Section 5 of the Limitation Act to condone the delay may be filed, the court will have to look into all the circumstances which are surrounding that particular application and the particular case, and where it sees that it would be unreasonable to condone the delay, like if the delay is for a very long period of time, or if there are sufficient rights which have accrued on the opposite party during the period of delay, which cannot be undone or which will cause unnecessary and grave inconvenience to the party in whose favor the right has accrued, then the court will not exercise its power under Section 5 to condone the delay. And in that way, it is not absolute as such, and it is something which the court will weigh in respect on the basis of what is the balance of convenience and whether the ends of justice will be met while condoning that delay.
Yeah. So in simple words, it's not absolute. It is taken on a case-to-case basis whether to condone the delay or not. So now, Brijesh, we just wanted to go further. Can you please share with us, like, let's say there's a situation, a client comes to you and says that I had to file a case and I'm aware that the time limit is over. So in legal terms, basically the case is barred by limitation, and he comes to you and he says that I know I had to file the case and the limitation period got over last month or the month before that, but this is my problem. So what will your advice to him or her be in this kind of situation where the case has been barred by limitation?
Yes, that's a very good question again, Alok. See, on this aspect, there are two courses of action that you will need to take. The very first course of action that you'll need to take is you will have to understand, or you will have to first figure out under which provision of law or under which statute you were supposed to file that particular application or that particular petition or suit, arising of which particular statute. Now, you need to look at whether that particular statute itself provides for a particular period of time within which that particular act has to be done. If that particular act has to be done in a particular period of time as per the statute itself, then you have very little scope for invoking Section 5 of the Limitation Act, like I said before. And within the statute itself, sometimes there are some exceptions which are provided for getting over this particular impediment of not being able to file the case on time. In certain statutes, there is always a proviso which is provided in the period of limitation which is prescribed, and you can try to work out whether you can go under that proviso. If there is no particular time period which is prescribed within that particular statute itself, then you have every right to invoke Section 5 of the Limitation Act and provide adequate and sufficient cause to the court to condone the delay that has been caused in approaching the court.
Okay. So the next question is, when should the plea of a case being barred by limitation be taken up by the defendants? When should they take it up?
See, ideally, the plea of limitation of a particular cause being barred by limitation should be taken up at the earliest opportunity which is given to the defendants. So if I have to file a written statement to a suit, to a plaint, and if that suit, if the plaint itself is barred by limitation, then I have to take up the plea in my written statement itself. It is not necessary that I provide a separate application, that I file a separate application before the court to dismiss the suit on the point of being barred by limitation. Now, the CPC itself in Order 7, Rule 11, Clause D provides that the court may dismiss a suit if it is satisfied that it is barred by any law. In this case, the law of limitation. So I can file an application under Order 7, Rule 11, clause D to seeking the court to dismiss the plaint, stating that it is barred by limitation. However, the plea has to be taken at the earliest instance before the court, and the more I delay in taking such a plea before the court, the more fatal it is going to be to me as well. But then the Supreme Court has also held time and again that even if such a plea is not taken by any of the parties, especially by the defendants, the court should also look into the aspect whether the suit which is being filed or the appeal or the application which is being filed is within time or not, especially because limitation generally happens to be a mixed question of law as well as fact. So it may not always be possible for the court to decide at the very beginning itself whether a suit or a cause is barred by limitation, but it will not prevent, or it should not prevent, the court from framing an issue on the question of the maintainability of the suit itself on the question of limitation.
So, dear students, thank you very much for joining us. So, I really invite all students to watch this video multiple times because there was a lot of inputs, lot of data which Brijesh shared, and this is important for you, not just for your exams, but to have an understanding of how the Limitation Act works. So, that is our mission here at Excel Academy. We just don't want you to do well at the exams, which you will, and will obviously help you to do well in the exams. That's our primary duty, but we want you to have that extra edge, and that is why we have shows like the practical show where we get legal experts from different areas of law and discuss the practical side of law. So thanks a lot for joining us. Please do make sure that you share this with your friends, subscribe to Excel Academy, and also let us know what you felt about this video in the comments below. We'll be more than happy to reply. Thank you and all the best to you.